I trusted my marriage. I trusted my husband. I never thought one clause could erase everything. I remember the day I signed it, the postnuptial agreement. It was late in the evening, and the air was heavy with the kind of silence that always follows a long conversation. The smell of freshly brewed coffee still lingered in the kitchen, and the last rays of sunlight filtered through the blinds. Daniel sat across from me, his eyes too steady, his voice too calm. He had insisted on this, said it was for peace of mind, for both of us. That the agreement was just a formality. We had been married for 5 years by then, but the last couple of months had been rocky. Little things, the kind that don't seem important until they pile up. He came home later than usual, stopped sharing small details about his day, became defensive over things that didn't matter. And when he suggested the postnuptial agreement, I didn't question it. I thought it was just a precaution, a sign that he was taking care of our future. I didn't think to read the entire document carefully. I didn't notice the language, the clauses that weren't discussed, the terms buried under legal jargon. I trusted him. I trusted my marriage. Life before the postnuptial agreement felt warm, familiar. Daniel and I had built something solid together, or so I thought. We had our house, a steady income, our weekend routines, dinner on Fridays, quiet mornings with coffee and the newspaper, long walks in the park with the dog. The house smelled of fresh laundry and the lingering scent of vanilla candles. I had convinced myself that we were in a good place, that the hard years of building a life together had passed, and now it was just about maintaining it. Daniel had always been the more pragmatic one in our relationship. He was the one who handled the finances, the one who balanced the budget, who made sure the bills were paid on time. I was the dreamer, the one who believed in love, in loyalty, in the quiet happiness of daily life. We had our roles, and they worked. Or so I thought. There were moments, though, when I felt something shift, small, subtle things that didn't quite add up. I noticed how he began to retreat into his work more, how he'd come home later, how he'd avoid eye contact when I asked him about his day. I didn't question him, though. I didn't want to start an argument over something I couldn't quite pinpoint. But then, the suggestion of the postnuptial agreement came. And I agreed to it. The contract was simple enough at first glance, the usual financial protections, terms for division of assets in the event of a separation. Daniel had been clear about the terms. He said it was just for our security, a way to safeguard ourselves in case anything went wrong in the future. He told me it wasn't about trust, it was just about being practical. I signed without hesitation, without fully absorbing the weight of what I was doing. I didn't ask enough questions. I didn't insist on reading every line. I trusted him. But something felt off when I looked at that agreement again, a few months later, after everything had fallen apart. By then, the betrayal was too clear, and I began to realize how much I had missed. There was a clause, buried on page 12, that I had never bothered to read in full. The clause that, in hindsight, erased my future. It wasn't until months after I signed the postnuptial agreement that I realized the depth of my mistake. Daniel's behavior had shifted even more drastically. He had become distant, cold even. When I confronted him about it, he assured me everything was fine. But the lie was starting to show through, his late nights at the office, his growing indifference, his emotional withdrawal. And then, one evening, while I was tidying up his desk, I came across something, a set of bank statements, an account I didn't recognize. My heart raced as I scanned through them. The transactions didn't make sense. The numbers didn't match up. I found irregularities, a hidden account I knew nothing about. I felt the walls close in around me as I pieced together the truth. I approached Daniel with the evidence, my hands trembling. He looked at me, that same calm expression on his face, and in that moment, I realized that everything I had believed about our life together was a lie. I don't understand, I said, my voice shaking. What is this? Why didn't you tell me about this account? He didn't flinch. His face remained impassive as he answered, It's just something I set up for emergencies, in case anything ever happened. Emergencies? I echoed, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. You've been hiding money from me, Daniel. For how long? I didn't want to worry you, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. It was just a precaution. But I knew better now. The more I searched, the more I uncovered. I found the truth in small pieces, all the things he had hidden from me. The lies, the secrets, the deceit. And buried in the postnuptial agreement was the clause that would protect him if things ever went wrong, a clause that, if we separated, would leave me with nothing. I confronted him that night, the weight of the truth heavy in the air between us. I wasn't sure what I expected, an apology, a tear, some sign of remorse. But there was nothing. Just the coldness in his eyes, the distance between us that had grown so large I could no longer reach him. "I can't believe you," I said, my voice breaking. "I trusted you. I believed in this marriage, in us. How could you do this to me?" Daniel didn't respond. He didn't have to. The damage was done. That night, I left the house. I couldn't breathe with him in the same space anymore, couldn't stomach the lies any longer. I spent the next few days in a hotel, trying to piece together what had happened, trying to understand how I had missed so much. The truth hit me like a freight train, and I couldn't stop the flood of emotions that came with it. Anger, betrayal, regret. But even in the midst of the chaos, I couldn't ignore the words that had haunted me all along, my mother's voice, soft and steady, telling me to pay attention, to trust my instincts, to never settle for a love that didn't honor me. I hadn't listened. Now I was paying the price. I spent the next few days trying to piece myself back together. The world had shifted in ways I couldn't quite grasp yet. I felt like I was walking through a fog. Everything was familiar, but nothing felt the same. I was in that strange space where everything I had once believed about my life, my marriage, had unraveled in an instant. All that was left were the raw threads of trust and betrayal, still tangled and unspoken. The first few nights in the hotel were the hardest. I couldn't sleep, couldn't settle my mind. I kept replaying the confrontation over and over in my head, wondering where I had gone wrong. Had I missed signs? Should I have asked more questions? Should I have trusted my gut when it told me something wasn't right? But the truth was, I had ignored all those signs. I had brushed them off as insignificant. I had believed in the life we had built together, even when cracks had started to appear. I had trusted him, and that trust had cost me more than I ever could have imagined. I had always been the optimist in our relationship. Daniel, on the other hand, had been the practical one. The one who handled the finances, made the plans, kept everything running smoothly. I had always believed that our marriage was solid because we were a team. We balanced each other. But now I understood the harsh truth. I had been blind to the things I didn't want to see. It was my mother's words that kept echoing in my head. Don't ignore what your instincts are telling you. I had always thought of her as cautious, maybe even overly protective at times, but now, as I sat in that sterile hotel room, I realized that she had been trying to protect me from something I hadn't been ready to face. She had warned me about trusting too easily. She had told me that love wasn't about blind faith, that it had to be based on respect, honesty, and mutual understanding. I had dismissed her advice as old-fashioned back then. Now, it felt like a lifeline I had thrown away. I called her the next morning. "Mom," I said, my voice shaking as I sat at the small table in the hotel room. I need to talk to you." She could tell immediately that something was wrong. "What happened, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice steady but concerned. "It's Daniel," I said, struggling to find the words. "I found something I wasn't supposed to know. He's been hiding money from me. And there's a clause in the postnuptial agreement, a clause I didn't read, that would leave me with nothing if we ever separated." I could hear her sigh on the other end of the line. It wasn't a sigh of surprise. It was a sigh of knowing. "I warned you, didn't I?" she said softly. "I told you to be careful, but you never listened." I could hear the pain in her voice, the motherly disappointment that I had ignored her advice. It hurt more than I expected. I had always thought of my mother as someone who was always right, always in control. But now I felt like I had failed her, failed to listen when she had tried to protect me. "I'm sorry, Mom," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I should have listened to you." She was quiet for a moment, letting the silence stretch between us before she spoke again. "You can't change what's already happened," she said gently. "But you can learn from it. Don't let him take away your future, sweetheart. You still have your dignity, your strength. Don't let this destroy you." Her words gave me a glimmer of hope. But even as I clung to them, I couldn't ignore the deep ache in my chest. I didn't know what the future held for me now. My entire sense of self had been tied up in this marriage, in the life Daniel and I had built together. And now, all of that was in question. The following days were a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and decisions that felt too big to make. I met with a lawyer to discuss the postnuptial agreement and what my options were. The lawyer was kind but blunt. "If you want to fight this, it's going to be a long battle," she said. "But it's clear that your husband made a serious mistake. You don't have to settle for nothing." But even as the lawyer spoke, I felt a sense of paralysis. The idea of fighting Daniel felt like fighting myself, like I was tearing apart the life I had once believed in. But the alternative, accepting his betrayal without a fight, was unimaginable. A few days later, I returned home to collect a few things. The house felt like a stranger's now, the walls heavy with memories I no longer wanted. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, staring at the bed where we had once slept together, the place where we had shared so many moments of intimacy and love. Now, it felt like a battlefield. I opened the closet and began to pack my things: clothes, toiletries, the few personal items I had left. I tried not to think about the future, about the mess I was leaving behind. All I could focus on was getting through the next hour, the next minute. Just as I was finishing, I heard the doorbell ring. I opened the door to find Daniel standing on the other side. His face was tired, his eyes pleading. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated for a moment, but then I stepped aside to let him in. "I'm sorry," he said, looking down at the floor. "I know I've messed up. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I didn't mean to hurt you." I wanted to say something, to scream, to cry, to throw something at him, but all I could do was stand there, watching him. His words felt empty, like a weak apology trying to cover up a lifetime of lies. "You're not sorry for what you did," I finally said, my voice steady despite the pain. "You're sorry you got caught." He didn't say anything to that. "I'm done," I said quietly. "I can't keep living in a lie." That was the moment everything changed. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It wasn't a grand gesture of revenge. It was simply the moment I realized that I couldn't keep putting my future in someone else's hands. I was done being a passive participant in my own life. The days that followed were filled with a strange mixture of clarity and confusion. I had made the decision to leave, to move on, but there were still so many things to untangle, not just the practicalities of separating our lives, but the emotional weight of everything that had happened. I felt like I was drowning in paperwork, decisions, and appointments, yet still stuck in a limbo where nothing felt real. Daniel had left the house for good, staying with a friend, and I was alone again. The silence of the house was deafening. I had thought it would feel like relief, but it didn't. It just felt empty. Every room felt like it was waiting for him to return. The smell of his cologne still lingered in the air. His things were still scattered around, reminders of a life I had once thought was secure. For the first time in months, I let myself cry. I cried for the life I had lost, for the trust that had been shattered, for the woman I had become, the one who had ignored her own instincts, who had blindly followed the path that Daniel had laid out for us. I cried for the future that would never be. The next morning, I woke up early. The sunlight filtered softly through the blinds, casting a warm glow across the room. For a moment, I almost felt normal again, like I could step outside and pretend that everything was fine. But the reality hit me quickly. I was no longer that person, the one who could ignore her own pain, the one who could pretend that everything would just work itself out. I was someone new now, and I didn't know what that meant yet. A few days later, I met with the lawyer again to discuss my options. This time, I was more focused, more determined. I wasn't just looking for advice on how to handle the postnuptial agreement. I was looking for a way to take back control of my life. The lawyer, a sharp woman in her 40s with short, dark hair and a no-nonsense attitude, gave me a firm look as she laid out the terms. "You don't have to accept this agreement as is," she said. "You have legal rights, and if Daniel was hiding assets or manipulating you, we can fight this." But even as she spoke, I felt a twinge of uncertainty. I wanted to fight. I wanted to make him pay for what he had done. but I also didn't want to lose myself in a battle that might never end. The thought of dragging this out in court, of continually reopening old wounds, made my stomach turn. I just want to move on, I said quietly. I want to rebuild. I want to start over. She nodded, understanding the exhaustion in my voice. You can rebuild, but you also deserve what's rightfully yours. You don't have to let him walk away with everything. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. The thought of fighting Daniel felt exhausting, like it would consume me. But the thought of letting him walk away without consequences felt worse. My emotions were tangled in knots. I was angry, hurt, confused, and terrified all at once. I reached for my phone and scrolled through the messages I had received over the past few days, messages of support from friends, family, and even acquaintances. They all said the same thing: you're strong. You'll get through this. I wanted to believe them. I did believe them in some part of me. But another part of me, the part that had trusted Daniel, that had believed in our future, couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. How could I have been so blind? How could I have let him control so much of my life without even realizing it? I closed my eyes and tried to calm my mind. I needed clarity. I needed to make a decision, but I couldn't do it in the heat of my emotions. I would give myself time to heal, time to think, and most importantly, time to listen to my own instincts. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork, appointments, and more silence. Daniel tried to contact me several times, but I ignored his calls. I couldn't bear to hear his voice, to hear him apologize again. I didn't want his apologies. They didn't mean anything anymore. One evening, after a long day of sorting through documents and making phone calls, I sat down in front of the television, but I couldn't focus on anything. I felt a strange emptiness, like something was missing. I thought about calling a friend, but I didn't want to burden anyone with my pain. I was tired of talking about it, tired of explaining. And then, for the first time in weeks, I picked up my journal. I had always kept a journal, but I had stopped writing it after I married Daniel. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped listening to myself, stopped connecting with my own thoughts and feelings. But tonight, I needed to write. I wrote about my marriage, about the trust one had placed in Daniel, about the lies he had told, about the moments I had ignored. I wrote about my mother's warning and how I had brushed it off as unnecessary, even though deep down, I knew she was right. I wrote about the postnuptial agreement and how I had signed it without thinking, trusting that Daniel had my best interests at heart. As the words poured out onto the page, I felt a weight lift from my chest. For the first time in months, I was truly hearing myself. I was no longer hiding from my own pain, no longer burying my emotions in favor of maintaining the illusion of a perfect life. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting for my financial security. I was fighting for my sense of self, for the woman I had been before I had let someone else dictate my choices. I was fighting for the part of me that had been silenced for too long. The next morning, I called the lawyer again. I want to fight, I said. I want what's mine. I won't settle for anything less. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then the lawyer's voice was steady, reassuring. We'll take it from here. I hung up the phone and sat in silence for a moment. For the first time since everything had begun to unravel, I felt a small but undeniable sense of strength. I had made a decision, and no matter how difficult it would be, I was going to see it through. I was going to take back my life. The decision to fight was harder than I expected. It wasn't about the money, or even about winning the legal battle. It was about reclaiming a part of myself I had unknowingly lost. That part of me that had trusted too easily, that had believed in a future built on someone else's promises, without truly questioning if those promises were being kept. The more I sat with the decision, the more I realized just how much I had ignored, not just from Daniel, but from myself. How many times had I brushed off my own doubts in favor of maintaining a peaceful facade? How many times had I silenced my instincts because I didn't want to rock the boat? How had I gotten so lost in someone else's version of happiness that I couldn't even recognize my own needs anymore? The battle ahead wasn't just about confronting Daniel. It was about confronting myself. It was about facing the fact that I had been complicit in my own silence. The first few weeks of the legal process were draining. It felt like every step forward was met with another obstacle, another reason to doubt myself. There were hearings, paperwork, and hours spent combing through documents that seemed endless. Every time I thought I had a grip on the situation, a new twist would emerge, another lie uncovered. But I kept going. Not for Daniel. Not even for the money or the house. But for me. I needed to. Prove to myself that I could stand up for what I deserved, that I could trust my own voice again. Daniel, in the meantime, was doing everything he could to avoid confrontation. He was careful with his words, careful with his actions, trying to convince me that he had changed, that he was sorry, that everything could go back to the way it was. But I wasn't fooled. His apologies felt rehearsed, his promises empty. I could see through the facade now. One evening, I received a letter from him, sent via his lawyer. The letter was full of guilt and regret, an attempt to manipulate me into settling quietly, to avoid the messy public fallout that was sure to follow if we went to trial. The words were carefully crafted to sound sincere, but all I could feel was the weight of his deception. He wanted me to forgive him, to forget everything, to return to the life we had once shared. But that life was gone. It was a lie, and I couldn't pretend anymore. I read the letter and then, without hesitation, I tore it up. I knew that this was the moment when I had to fully let go. I couldn't keep clinging to the hope that somehow Daniel would change. I had to let him go, and with him, all the illusions I had built around our marriage. The legal proceedings dragged on for what felt like an eternity. There were moments when I thought about giving up, when the weight of the fight seemed too much to bear. But every time I felt like surrendering, I reminded myself why I had started this journey. I wasn't just fighting for my financial security. I was fighting for my peace of mind, for the future I deserved. I was fighting for the woman I had been before all of this, the woman who trusted her instincts, who knew her worth, who refused to settle for less than she deserved. And as much as the process hurt, it also allowed me to rediscover a sense of strength I hadn't known I still had. Every day, I moved closer to the person I wanted to become. Every document signed, every phone call made, every conversation with my lawyer felt like another step toward reclaiming myself. One day, while I was sitting in my lawyer's office, I received a phone call from my mother. Her voice, as always, was calm and steady, a comfort amidst the chaos of my life. "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" she asked, her tone warm but concerned. "I'm fine," I said, though I knew the words didn't fully capture what I was feeling. "It's been hard, but I'm making it through." She was quiet for a moment, as if weighing her words carefully. "I'm proud of you, you know that, right?" I didn't answer right away. Her words, simple as they were, hit me harder than I expected. In the midst of all the anger, betrayal, and confusion, I hadn't stopped to think about how much strength it had taken to get here. How much courage it had taken to face the truth, to stand up for myself, to fight when every part of me wanted to collapse. "You've always had strength in you, sweetheart," she continued. "It's just that sometimes we forget how strong we are until we're forced to remember." Her words hit me in a way I hadn't expected. I had spent so much of my life trying to please others, trying to keep the peace, that I had forgotten my own power. But I was starting to remember. I was starting to reclaim it. The day of the final settlement arrived sooner than I expected. The legal team had worked out a deal that wasn't perfect, but it was enough. I wasn't going to get everything I had hoped for, but I had something more valuable than money: my freedom. The freedom to rebuild, to move on, to start fresh. When the deal was signed, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel angry. I just felt empty in a way. But it wasn't a bad emptiness. It was the kind of emptiness that comes after a long, hard fight. The kind of emptiness that comes with knowing you did everything you could, and now it was time to move forward. A few weeks after the settlement, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, looking at the woman I had become. The face staring back at me was familiar, but there was something different about her. She wasn't the woman who had blindly trusted a man who hadn't earned it. She wasn't the woman who had stayed silent for fear of rocking the boat. She was someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who had learned to listen to her instincts, to trust her own voice. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled at the reflection. The process of healing was slower than I had hoped. There were days when I felt like I was moving forward, and days when I felt like I was back at square one. But every day, I grew stronger. Every day, I got closer to the person I had always been. It wasn't an easy road. There were no grand gestures of redemption, no dramatic moments of forgiveness. But what I found in the end was something far more important: peace. A quiet, steady peace that came from within, from knowing that I had fought for myself and had refused to let anyone else define my worth. The days after the settlement felt both like an ending and a beginning. The legal battle was over, but the emotional journey was far from done. I had won the fight for my future, but now I had to rebuild my life from the ground up. Every day felt like I was laying down bricks, small steps forward in the face of all the things that had come before. I remember one afternoon, just a few weeks after everything had settled, I stood in the kitchen of my apartment, chopping vegetables for a simple dinner. The sun was setting outside, casting a soft glow through the window, and the quiet hum of the city outside felt oddly comforting. It was one of those moments where everything felt right. Not perfect, not grand, but steady. And for the first time in months, I felt like I was truly in control again. I had spent so much of my marriage trying to hold everything together, trying to make things work even when they weren't. Now, I was learning what it felt like to just be, to breathe, to exist in a space where I didn't have to explain myself, to live a life that was mine and mine alone. I kept busy. I focused on my work, and I reconnected with friends I had neglected during the years of my marriage. Slowly, I started to build the life I had put on hold. I even picked up a few new hobbies, something I hadn't done in years. I started writing again, filling up notebooks with my thoughts and dreams. It felt like reclaiming a part of myself that had been buried under the weight of someone else's priorities. But it wasn't just about keeping busy. It was about rediscovering who I was, who I had been before I married Daniel, before I had let my identity become so entangled with his. I realized that, in the years we were together, I had given up pieces of myself. Not in big ways, but in small, subtle ways. I had stopped speaking up for what I wanted. I had stopped trusting my instincts. I had silenced myself to keep the peace. And I had done it for so long that I had forgotten how to listen to the voice that truly mattered, my own. One afternoon, I sat down at my desk, a cup of tea in front of me, and I thought about what it would look like to live a life where I could trust myself again. The thought of it filled me with both excitement and fear. What if I made the wrong choices again? What if I trusted the wrong people? But as I sat there, I realized something important. I wasn't the same person I had been when I made those choices. I had learned. I had grown. And that meant I could trust myself, not perfectly, not without hesitation, but with a newfound understanding of my own worth. A few months later, I ran into Daniel at the grocery store. I hadn't seen him since the separation, and I wasn't sure what to expect. He looked the same, though there was something different about him, a weariness in his eyes, a distance in his posture. He wasn't the man I had known. He was a stranger now, someone I had once trusted completely but could never trust again. We stood there for a few moments, unsure of how to navigate the awkwardness. Finally, he spoke. "I heard you're doing well," he said, his voice tentative. "I'm glad." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to lash out, to remind him of all the ways he had hurt me. But another part of me realized that there was nothing left to say. The truth had already been spoken. The past had been laid bare. "I'm doing fine," I said, my voice steady. "I'm rebuilding. It's hard, but I'm moving forward." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For everything. I never meant to hurt you." I looked at him for a moment, and I realized that his apology didn't matter anymore. It wasn't about him. It was about me. It was about what I had learned, about the strength I had found in myself. I didn't need him to apologize. I didn't need him to acknowledge the hurt he had caused. I had already forgiven myself, and that was all that mattered. "I know," I said, my voice soft. "But I've moved on." And with that, I walked away. In the months that followed, I continued to rebuild. I didn't rush it. I didn't try to force a timeline on my healing. I simply allowed myself to move forward, one day at a time. Some days were harder than others, but each step felt like progress. I started to take risks again. I went on dates, but I didn't rush into anything. I focused on the things that made me happy, the things that made me feel whole. I took weekend trips to places I had always wanted to visit. I spent time with friends, rekindling relationships that had faded during my marriage. I felt a sense of freedom I had never known before, and I realized that I was starting to trust myself again. I was starting to believe that I deserved happiness, that I didn't have to settle for anything less than a life that honored who I truly was. One evening, while sitting on my balcony, I looked out over the city as the sun dipped. Below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was quiet, peaceful. The chaos of the past seemed so distant now, like it belonged to someone else. And in that moment, I understood something important. The hardest part of my journey hadn't been the betrayal, the hurt, or even the legal battles. The hardest part had been learning to trust myself again. To believe that I was worthy of a future where I called the shots, where my needs came first. The path forward wasn't always clear. But for the first time in a long time, I was no longer afraid to walk it alone. As I sat there, reflecting on how far I had come, I thought about the lessons I had learned, the strength I had discovered, and the woman I was becoming. I knew that I couldn't change the past, and I wasn't sure I would ever fully forgive Daniel for what he had done. But I also knew that forgiveness didn't have to come from him. It had to come from me. And once I had forgiven myself, the weight of the past started to lift. As the months went on, I continued to grow into a version of myself I hadn't known I could be. It wasn't about forgetting the past, but about learning from it. It wasn't about erasing the pain, but about understanding that the pain didn't define me. I had been through a storm, but now I was standing on firmer ground. I had found new confidence in small things. A quiet evening spent reading a book without distraction, cooking a meal just for myself, savoring each bite without worrying about anyone else's opinion. I started to make choices based on what I wanted, not what others expected of me. I started taking care of myself, physically and emotionally. I began working out, something I hadn't done in years. I took yoga classes to center my mind, to reconnect with the body I had neglected for so long. I surrounded myself with people who lifted me up, friends who supported me, and family who loved me unconditionally. But most importantly, I learned how to be alone without feeling lonely. I had spent so many years defining myself by my relationships, by what I could give to others. But I had forgotten how to define myself by who I was at the core, outside of the roles I had played. Then, one day, as I was walking through the park, I ran into someone from my past. It was an old friend from college, someone I hadn't seen in years. We exchanged pleasantries, caught up on life, and soon the conversation turned to relationships. "I heard about your divorce," she said gently, as we sat on a nearby bench. "I'm sorry you had to go through that." I nodded, appreciating her empathy. "Thank you. It's been a journey." She paused for a moment, then asked, "How are you really doing?" "I mean, deep down." I hesitated. I didn't want to make the conversation too heavy. But the question felt different from the usual surface-level inquiries. It felt sincere, like she actually cared. "I'm doing better," I said, looking at the ground for a moment. "It's been hard, but I've learned a lot about myself. More than I ever thought I would. I've learned to trust myself again, to stop blaming myself for everything that went wrong." She smiled, and I could see the understanding in her eyes. "That's incredible," she said softly. "It takes so much courage to get to that place. I admire you for it." Her words hit me in a way I hadn't expected. I hadn't realized how much I needed validation, even from someone who wasn't part of my inner circle. It was a reminder that I wasn't alone in this, that my growth wasn't just about me, but about the impact it could have on others. Later that evening, as I sat in the quiet of my apartment, I reflected on our conversation. I realized how far I had come since that first day of separation, how much more resilient I had become. The process of healing wasn't linear, but it was real. It wasn't about erasing the pain or pretending that everything was okay. It was about accepting that life had given me a new path, and I had the strength to walk it. There were still hard days. There were still moments when I would be hit with waves of sadness, regret, or loneliness. But now I had the tools to handle them. I had learned to sit with those emotions, to process them, and then let them go. I didn't have to stay stuck in them forever. A few months later, I found myself standing in front of my bathroom mirror, looking at the woman staring back at me. She wasn't the same woman who had signed that postnuptial agreement, the woman who had ignored her instincts for the sake of her marriage. She wasn't the woman who had stayed silent, hoping things would work themselves out. She was someone stronger, someone who had learned to fight for herself, to trust her own voice, and to know her worth. And as I looked at her, I realized something important. I wasn't just healing from my marriage. I was healing from years of self-doubt, from allowing others to define my value, from letting myself believe that I wasn't enough. The truth was, I had always been enough. A few weeks later, I received a letter from Daniel. It wasn't the first time he had tried to reach out to me, but this time I opened it. In the letter, he expressed his remorse, his regrets, and his wish for reconciliation. He wrote about how he had failed me, how he understood the pain he had caused, and how he hoped we could find a way to be friends. For a moment, I was tempted. I wanted to believe in the possibility of forgiveness, of finding peace between us. But then I remembered how far I had come. I remembered the strength I had found in myself. And I knew deep down that reconciliation wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. I didn't respond to the letter. I didn't need to. The closure had already come, not through his apology, but through my own healing. I had forgiven myself for the mistakes I had made, for the trust one had given when it wasn't deserved, and for the ways I had silenced my own voice. As time passed, I found peace. Not just in the absence of Daniel, but in the presence of myself. I was no longer afraid of being alone. I was no longer afraid of the unknown. I had discovered that the only person I needed to be loyal to was myself. I knew that life would continue to throw challenges my way, but I also knew that I had the strength to face them. The strength to trust myself again. The strength to rebuild, to grow, and to keep moving forward. As I stood on the balcony one evening, looking out at the sunset, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. I had made it through the hardest time in my life, and I had come out stronger on the other side. And in that moment, I knew one thing for certain. I would never again ignore my own instincts. I would never again silence my own voice. I had learned the hardest lesson of all, that my future was mine to create, and no one, not even the person I had loved most, could take that away from me. As I stand here today, looking back on everything that's happened, I can't help but think about how far I've come. I've learned a lot about myself, about trust, and about what it truly means to forgive, not just others, but myself. This journey wasn't easy. There were days when I felt broken, when I wondered if I'd ever find the strength to move on. But in the end, it wasn't about him. It was about me. It was about finding the courage to stand up for myself, to listen to my instincts, and to trust that I could rebuild my life from the ground up. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean accepting someone's wrongdoing without consequences. Forgiveness means releasing yourself from the chains of anger and regret so you can move forward with your life. So, I leave you with this thought. How many times have you ignored your own instincts for the sake of peace or love? What would it take for you to listen to yourself, to trust your heart, and to fight for the future you deserve? I encourage you to reflect on your own journey, and if you've ever been in a situation where you felt lost, remember that the power to find your way back is already within you. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have done the same? And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories every week. This is where we close the chapter for today, but the next one might be just around the corner.